Greetings, my name is Jack Jennings and the title of this video is What Does It Take to Become an Indian Classical Musician? So just to be a musician of any kind takes so much dedication because music is so infinite and there's so many different things that you need to put into your music in order for it to be a complete expression of what you want to say and what the music is requiring of you. But particularly with Indian classical music, it takes many years of training and you really need teachers. You really need teachers who know about the music and have had really good training themselves. And it takes a lot of time, and it has to really come from the heart as well. You have to really love the music to actually embody it, because you have to improvise. You have to reach into yourself in order to bring the music out. So it really has to be something which is very much, you have to feel it inside yourself in order to really play it. But to try to demystify things and to actually put them into some kind of structure, I've come up with my list of the 7 essential skills. It's a bit silly doing this really, because there's you could write a list of any number. You could write maybe 100 essential skills, or it depends how you break it down. But I thought 7 might be a good number, as we have 7 syllables, the Sargam, Panesar, and 7 seems to be a nice number. So let me begin. The first essential skill is the knowledge of Sargam, which is the vocal system of Indian classical music, the Sarigama Padanisa, which is a syllable for every note of the scale. Every Indian classical musician really knows this just inside and out, and it gets to the point where you hear notes, you hear different phrases, and the Sargam syllables actually just flash up in your mind as you're hearing these phrases. So just if I saw a colour, I would immediately think of that colour. So if you hear a note, you should immediately know what the Sargam is. So I might hear a musician play these notes, and immediately, once you've learned the whole system, this is immediately the syllable pa, da, pa will spring into my mind. Because it's almost like a language. If I see the colour red, then the word red will appear in my mind. So if I hear these notes, then the syllable pa da pa will spring into my mind. So once you've really assimilated this, it's just fantastic for ear training, and you can memorise compositions in ways that would be difficult to memorise without that system. So this is really related to ear training. Indian classical musicians have really fantastic ears, and the Sargam system is how it's codified, what they're hearing and how they're able to identify it and play it. It's done through the language of Sargam, hearing a note, knowing the Sargam, and then knowing on your instrument where exactly that note is. So I would say that that is the #1 foundational skill, and there's no end to how good you can be at any of these skills. You can have a little bit of skill, or you can have infinite skill, or you can be the best, and then you can still get better. There's just no end to it. Okay, point number 2 would be knowledge of different scales. So this is very related to the Sargam. Using Sargam, you explore a massive variety of different scales. So, for example, if you're playing one style of music, it might be okay to know 5 or 6 different scales, and then there might be other scales which you wouldn't really use very often. They might be very specific situations that you need them, or maybe you'd be fine just with the 7 modes. But with Indian classical music, you have to know a huge number of scales, and you need to be able to just orientate yourself in lots of different scales, using your ear. So you can't have any difficulty about trying to memorize them or finding it difficult to finger your way around different scales. You just need to have a complete level of comfort with playing in any different tonality. So that's something that's really, really essential for Indian classical musicians to know. So that's how I flattened the da and the ni. So we had a kormal da and a kormal ni. That's the Raag. rag called Cherokee. It's a South Indian rag. Sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa. So that's just one of tons of examples. You can create all kinds of different combinations of notes. The third point is also related to scales. It's knowledge of rags, so rag structures. To define a rag, you would be looking at a certain scale, and then you would have different rules of how you move around that scale in order for it to become that particular rag that you're playing. So for example, this might mean skipping some notes in an ascending order but using them in a descending order, or it might mean that as you're phrasing you have to highlight certain notes and you have to do different things to juxtapose the position of one note against another. So there's a never-ending number of different rags, different ways of treating perhaps the same scale, but to produce a different kind of melodic sense of balance. So this is, you just can't really do Indian classical music without having this knowledge of rags. Sa, re, ga, re, sa. And you might even use combinations like sa, re, ga, ma, ga, re, using the Shuddha re, the natural re, and then using the Kurmal re after that. So you would just pronounce it as re, but theoretically you know that this is a Kurmal re or a Shuddha re. In some schools they would focus on maybe playing 10 or 20 rags in a concert format and becoming very, very well versed in a kind of smaller number of rags. And other schools would focus on playing a very huge range of rags, because there's hundreds of different rags. So different schools would approach this in different ways, but nevertheless it's a huge part of a musician's repertoire and something which takes a lot of work, because the teacher really needs to show you how these rags really sound. In order for you to master them, you really need to learn it from someone and be given some kind of feedback to say, yes, you've actually got the essence of the rag there, because it's very difficult to actually just do it without someone giving you that detailed feedback about how you're playing. The fourth point is about ornamentations. So Indian classical music is very much based on vocal music. So if you imagine the way that an Indian classical singer would move through different notes and would glide and would meld different notes together in a very beautiful and nuanced way, this is the kind of language that we're trying to bring out on our chosen instrument. So whether it's bending or sliding or all kinds of different things that you can do physically on the instrument, you need to have a really good grasp of the ornamentations, of the different techniques on your chosen instrument to get closer to that vocal sound of the voice. So if you didn't have that element in the playing, it really wouldn't have the sort of aesthetic quality that Indian classical music has. It wouldn't really evoke the sort of atmosphere and the kind of language that that music is all about. And I think that when you do bends with this, with that sort of movement, you somehow just get closer to the sound of a sitar. Something about the arc of the bend. The fifth essential skill is to know about the rhythm cycles of the tabla, and also concepts such as tihai, where you play a phrase 3 times to land on the sum on the first beat of the cycle, or jati, which is the Indian word for subdivisions, so being able to divide up the beat in different ways. So the way that we do this is actually learning the language of the tabla. You at least need to know the basic strokes on the tabla and what the vocal system for that is, because that's how you actually learn the different rhythm cycles. So whether they're cycles in 16 is a very common one, or cycles in 7 or 12 or 10, and there are lots of other ones which can be much more complicated than that, but you at least need to know the essential ones which really form the main basis of the material. the Kali. And the Baya. Back to the first beat. And then with Tihais, that's a really big subject, and it's something that is often more of an advanced thing, which musicians are really respected for being able to do very complicated Tihais and do a very big range of different Tihais. So that's something that really develops when you know the rhythm cycle very, very well. You start to build up a sense of how you can play these different rhythmic phrases that are repeated 3 times to come back to the beginning of the cycle. It's something that you do by memorizing fixed Tihais, but then you also learn to be able to actually improvise new Tihais. And that's where it becomes very interesting, and the personality of the musician really starts to play out in how they are able to juggle these different kind of games on stage with the tabla player playing different Tihais and seeing how far they can push it together. The 6th essential skill is speed and stamina. The traditional form of an Indian classical recital is to start very, very slow. And this is seen as really important because it's at the slow pace that you really bring out all the different nuances of the Raag. But the general progression is to increase the speed, and you gradually build up, maybe over 45 minutes or an hour, you build up to playing at very, very fast speeds for extensive periods. So you end up having to do phrases which are actually very long phrases and really keep notes churning out, and it has a real sort of flow to it, and the speed and the stamina just needs to be there to play these very long phrases. So that's really something which you need to be able to develop to do the kind of things that would be expected of you, especially in the later stages of the performance. The 7th essential skill is the endless capacity to improvise. I think it really goes without saying that you need to be able to improvise to play Indian classical music. You end up working with small bits of material. I say small meaning that you might only have a short composition which is maybe only a minute long, and then that might actually be a 10 or 15 minute sequence of music. So you have to fill up so much of the time with improvising. And then even being within a Raag structure, which has a set order of different notes and different combinations that you're playing, and you're supposed to be playing phrases which really highlight the quality of that Raag. In order to do that but keep generating new ideas within that form, you need to be able to improvise with these bits of information, bits of musical information, and find many, many different ways of embellishing them and stretching them and making them sound sort of new. So this is really where the improvisation comes in. It's one thing just to produce music for an hour and be improvising 90% of the time, but it's another thing to do it with a small amount of melodic material and just keep reimagining different ways that you can play with those notes. So that's a huge part of Indian classical music that that's something that you can't really learn. That really has to be something which you have to keep developing your language of music in your mind, and keep developing your imagination within a musical form. So you can learn a lot by taking all the different bits of information and then just trying to rechannel it through your own musical personality. And by that I mean just learning different patterns, learning different concepts, and then just having a go at just changing them a little bit and developing your own sense of where you want the music to go. So there's a fine line between keeping within the classical form but also following your own creative drive to see where do you really want to take your playing, and how does it really feel to you if you bend the note in this way, or if you elongate that note and shorten that note. And there's all kinds of different things that you can do, but it's like seeing so many different ways just to use the same few colours. That's the real beauty of the improvisation inside that classical form, in my opinion. So thanks very much for watching this video. I hope that you feel you understand a bit more what it takes to be an Indian classical musician, and all of the different clips that you've seen in this video, they're all taken from a course which I've created called Essential Techniques for Indian Guitar. And in this course I've tried to address all of these main areas that I've found are the most important things to understand to start to bring Indian classical music onto the electric guitar. So thanks very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.